In my previous video on narrative enchantment, I talked about how this works and why people are the way they are, but I did not discuss the mechanism by which this enchantment is activated. So I'm going to do that here. So in that video, it's got a nice animation kind of a dock that gets built. People walk out onto it, and then the pillars disappear. And this is to represent what happens in your average quote debate. And of course, a lot of questions about what a debate actually is. I hope I cleared them up in that video. I don't really want to go over that again, but I want to describe why this works, why the dock not having pillars suddenly doesn't cause people to change their mind. The way this particular type of enchantment works, this narrative enchantment or story enchantment is probably a closer term, but everyone's using the word narrative, so trying to be understandable and not overly precise because that's not helpful. This system works by tying things together. It doesn't work by standing on solid ground at all, because solid ground is often up for debate. And that's always the issue. You can always change the starting conditions of any logical argument and bang, get a completely different result. Starting positions matter. Logic is just a method of validation. So when you tie things together, and you don't have to use logic to do it, by the way, hint, hint, there's other ways to tie things together. It doesn't matter if there's ground that you're standing on. It doesn't matter if there are pillars holding you up. What matters is that you feel as though this story is tying things together for you. And it works the same way human memory works. You may have heard of the memory palace. I've talked about it before. That's the technique where you create a scenery in your mind and you navigate through that scenery and you associate things like letters of the alphabet with colors with numbers, and that helps tie your memory together. And then you can start tagging items that you see with the items in your palace, and that helps you to remember things. You can remember like 2 decks of card ordering and crazy things like that, or at least many people can. Probably not everybody, but it does work for some people. That methodology of memory is the same methodology in story enchantment. As you tie more and more pieces together, people believe it more. If it makes coherent sense to them, even if it's wrong, and that's always the key, it's wrong, it doesn't matter because they don't notice that it's wrong, and it feels tied together, it feels connected, it feels right. There's a quality to a good story that makes it feel truthful and correct. And that's the magic, if you will, or the enchantment behind that narrative enchantment that I was discussing in that previous video. Now, it's not merely a trick of memory. There's lots of reasons why people might reject a perfectly good story that holds together just as well. And that's part of the enchantment. If somebody who's ugly tells you the same story as somebody who's good looking, and this has been tested in psychology to the ends of time itself, you're going to believe the good looking person on average and not believe the ugly person. Same story, in some cases, same words. You can do this experiment yourself, by the way. It's not that hard. If your best friend tells you something, you are more likely to believe it. If a stranger on the street tells you the exact same thing, you are not as likely to believe it. These are all instances of enchantment because we have to tie the world together. People that are closer to us, we rely on more. We need to believe them even if they're lying, because if they're not with us anymore, we're in danger. And you could argue, Mark, that's not true. It was true in the past. No, it is still true. It's still a problem. Ever hear of canceling? Why do you think that happens? That only happens if everybody who's close to you abandons your position, right? Your boss ain't going to fire you if your boss is close to you. It's that simple. And we tend to sample on the examples. So, well, fair enough. We see people get canceled, but we don't see all the times that cancellation fails and why. And you've seen people on Twitter, hopefully, that have mentioned this, like, oh, somebody pointed that I said this on my YouTube channel, or I tweeted this out, or I posted this on Facebook, and my boss found out, and they didn't really care, and they didn't fire me, and maybe they reprimanded me and nothing else. That's failed cancellation. There's a lot more failed cancellation attempts than there are cancellation attempts, because if you're close to the people that you work with, your likelihood of getting fired drops dramatically. That's why new people get fired before older workers in many cases. Now, once those workers are past a certain age, we'll say that changes. Or if they're above a certain salary level, that can change. The type of connections matter, though. And you'll notice a lot of people can come from other places and suddenly they're believed and you're not. And that has to do with how believable they are. And believability of people has a lot to do with various other types of enchantment, not just tonal enchantment, not just logical enchantment or word enchantment, but also how good looking they are, how threatening they seem, because a good looking person can seem threatening. That's not hard for them to do. Or they can seem very nice, or they can seem neutral. Neutral people really kind of fly under the radar. Those people that you don't notice, they're the ones that get away with things. You see them in the spy shows and stuff in the movies occasionally, right? They're actually invisible. They're neutral. They're not throwing off a positive or a negative feeling to anybody. They're just blending in, being scenery and background. They're not concerned at all really with anything. They're not attached to the scene, and so you don't remember them. There's that nice psychological experiment that proves this point nicely. You see what you look for. There's the gorilla bouncing the basketball. You're counting how many times the basketball is being thrown and a gorilla walks in the middle and you don't see the gorilla. What's going on? Well, what's going on is story enchantment. The story you're told is that there's two people throwing a basketball, and there are two people throwing a basketball, and your job is to count the number of times the basketball is thrown or passed or whatever it is. Typically, it's bounced between the two players. And so you're watching the ball, and you're watching the people, and you're counting based on that. You have to exclude a lot of other information to keep track of something that busy, because basketballs move kind of fast, especially if you're pushing them down and then they're bouncing back up again and the other person has to catch it. You want to make sure they catch it. You don't want to count something that's not a catch. There's a lot of thought wrapped up into that, and so that's a form of enchantment. You've been enchanted with the story that what you're supposed to do is count these people passing a ball. You weren't enchanted with the story that, hey, watch out for the gorilla. Had they added that to the story, you'd probably have seen the gorilla. Most psychologists don't actually tell you that in many cases, but that is also true. That's why when you do it the second time, it doesn't work. For most people, not for everybody. Some people have a very short attention span. And so part of enchantment in general is drawing your attention to the things they want you to attend to and ignoring everything else. That's why, as I pointed out in the previous video, it's important to interrupt people when they make a mistake, or when they say something untrue or false, or when they're being duplicitous, because you need to catch them in the moment to disrupt the story before it becomes part of the enchantment. That's actually really important. That's why you interrupt people, because you're going to remember the story. And again, maybe you're remembering the story because it's told by a nice, smooth, soothing voice that's sort of neutral towards you, but friendly enough. Or maybe it's because a person's good looking. Or maybe it's because they have these credentials. Or maybe it's because you've heard them before and the stuff they've said before you've actually researched and it's definitely correct, but you're not going to research this because, hey, they have a history of saying correct things. Sure. There's lots of ways that people trap you into believing them. And it's not necessarily malicious. A lot of people don't know they're doing it. Some people have studied and done this deliberately in history, and it can be done, but most people fall into it quite naturally because enchanting people with a narrative or a story is something that we do all the time when we talk to people. And it's something that's done to us all the time. Hey, let me tell you this story. Let me tell you about what happened to me today, right? And they launch into this story and they want you to remember the story, right? Because it's something they remembered. And why did they remember it? Because it's a bunch of interconnected events for them. Does that mean you'll remember it? Usually, not always. I get some friends tell me stories, can't remember one of them because their stories aren't very coherent. They were coherent to them, I'm sure, but they don't make any sense. That happens. It's not a bad thing, but other people tell very good stories. And you can't tell if they're lying or not. And sometimes there's no way to look it up. Somebody says, hey, I ran into Jimmy Page once while I was in LA outside of one of the famous record studios or something. I can't verify that. I have no way to know if they're telling the truth or not, independent of their story. Does the story sound good or are there holes in it? And there are ways around that, right? You can ask for little extra details that they didn't put in, like how tall is Jimmy Page, and how tall are you, right? So, oh, I saw him on the street, and I just looked up at him and went nod, and then it's like, but you're taller than he is, so you didn't look up at him, right? You can tell. Sometimes there's no way to tell, and that's only if you care about the specific facts. Honestly, if somebody did or didn't meet Jimmy Page, aside from being extremely jealous, I wouldn't care. It just doesn't affect my life. I'd rather get along with the person than call them a liar, even if they're lying. And that is a survival skill that humans have so that they can cooperate together. Cooperation is key. We're cooperative creatures, highly cooperative creatures, because we need each other to survive, because nature will kill you if you're alone. You can just try it. It'll happen real quick. You'll realize, oh, nature stuff. This isn't playing around, this nature stuff. This is serious business. Yeah, it is. It's serious business. So you don't want to get trapped with that. You want to make sure that you're in a place where you're able to discern if what you're being told is important to you or not, or important to the other person, if that person's important to you. The internet really confuses this. It makes it very, very hard for us. Should we listen to a Sam Harris? He's kind of far away. I'm never going to run into him. I don't plan to go to LA. I mean, I might end up there or whatever, but I ain't planning on it. Probably won't bump into the guy. What do I need his approval or understanding, or why would I need an understanding of him? I probably don't. It's really not that important. Is some foreign war important? Probably not, actually, aside from maybe my friends who are affected by it, but I can just call them and ask them, find out how affected they are by it, rather than assuming, oh, your relative must be in danger because they're in this part of the world and there's a war going on. Like, maybe they're fine, maybe they left, who knows? Listening is a skill, right? And trying to get out in front of everybody's feelings means you're not listening. So you got to kind of pick one. And a lot of times listening is really a matter of not enchanting yourself by injecting your own story or your own narrative into the interaction. Because people do that all the time. There's an element of self-enchantment in narrative enchantment, where you become enamored with the story that you've already told or been told, and you embellish it to put yourself inside it without you even realizing. And the next thing you know, you're just being kind of rude to your friends. But you need them. So don't do that. So hopefully you can get a sense for we're activating our memory when we're tying things together, or when things are being tied together for us. Having a bunch of different things thrown at you is very jarring. But when somebody throws a bunch of things out and then puts them all together, you get this jarring sensation and then a soothing sensation, a comfort level. Oh, there's all these things. And you get the feeling like you know more things because all of these things were put there first and then tied together nicely. But you have to be careful because that can be a form of enchantment. And it's not necessarily good enchantment. If you want to know if it's good enchantment, you have to know if the person's good. It's hard to know good from bad people on the internet. It takes a lot of research, especially into their past. It's good to know if, the guy who's running the business that you care about has been investigated before by the government, for example. Maybe that's not such a wise investment. Oh, they've owned 3 businesses. They've all failed. Right? Oh, they've been convicted of fraud and allowed to start another business, because that happens all the time. So you need to do a lot more research online to avoid enchantment. Because once somebody gets good at enchanting people in a video, it's kind of all over for you. It's very hard to get out of that. And that's sort of part of this phenomena where you come for the Sokol Squared hoax, you start to latch on to James Lindsay because he hits it early and sort of seems like he knows what he's talking about. And then as he expands what he's talking about past his field of competence, the next thing you know, everything's left and right, and there's a woke left and a woke right, and then wokeism is some occult practice or something, and it gets very confusing very fast. It's not that James Lindsay isn't trustworthy, it's that he isn't trustworthy about things he knows nothing about and doesn't have the capacity to think about very clearly. And if you want to know more of that, I've got this playlist right here. You can check that out, where I bring the goods about what's going on with him and the woke right. And maybe that causes you to just move to somebody else who's talking better about the problem of the day, right? Oh, this other person has a much better take on wokeness. Maybe it's Carl Benjamin. Oh, he's got a much better take on wokeness. Yeah, maybe. That doesn't mean it's necessarily right, but that's why people hop from influencer to influencer. Influencers have an influence because they're giving you a story that you like to hear, that helps you to remember what's going on. It gives you a comfort level about something maybe you didn't understand how it fit into the world. How are people getting canceled and why? How do I avoid that? Oh, they're giving me these answers. Very tempting. Very tempting. But there's a lot of answers that would satisfy your curiosity, and most of them are wrong. And maybe that's okay for a bunch of things. The war in Ukraine. Yeah, sure. Maybe any old answer will do because it's a complicated topic. There's lots of reasons that wars happen, not 1 or 2 or 3. It's usually like half a dozen. And you can't track half a dozen things. And why track half a dozen things about something going on halfway across the world? No reason. In fact, why track half a dozen things if you're in the middle of the war? I'm not going to help you. Maybe if you're a diplomat trying to negotiate peace, maybe you need to worry about that. You're not that. Don't worry about it. So I understand how these things work. Obviously, each implementation is different. People have different ways to attract you to their story, and then they give you different qualities of stories. And that really explains all the variance in who listens to whom and why there's so many influencers and why they come and go. And that sucks because everybody likes a nice, clean, sharp answer on these things. But people are complicated. But hopefully I've given you some insight into how your brain works and how the brains of other people also work. There's no way to get around it or any of that. Of course, there's precautions you can take. As I mentioned, interrupt people in the middle of their story so that a good coherent story won't mind a few interruptions, and a bad one will fall apart with a couple of interruptions. It's that simple. So don't be so quick to let people finish, especially when what they're saying is wrong. And look, just be better. Be better. Be careful how you use your time, energy, and attention, for which I thank you.